My name is Michael Turner. I'm 46 years old. There is nothing colder than the touch of paper when you're expecting a warm hand. While you were sleeping, I already buried you. Those were the last words I heard before silence swallowed the room. Waking up after 2 years of absolute darkness feels like being born again, except your bones still carry the weight of past sins. Imagine opening your eyes, barely regaining control of your lungs, and the first thing you see isn't an embrace but a legal courier envelope resting on your lap. She didn't even look me in the eyes. She placed the divorce papers on my numb legs, signed the visitor log and walked away, hips swaying with the confidence of someone who believes she owns the world. What she doesn't know, what her greed completely blinded her to, is that in order to divorce someone, you first have to be legally married. She thinks she took everything from me. But what she actually did was hand me the key to her own destruction. The signature she was so desperate to get on those papers isn't my ending. It's the beginning of her downfall. She has no idea that, in the eyes of the law, we were never husband and wife. If you enjoy stories where betrayal has consequences and justice arrives without warning, leave a like and subscribe. Here, we share real stories of revenge and lessons that are never forgotten. Before the world went dark, I was a man who believed in building a shared empire. My life with Laura Mitchell wasn't an accident, or at least that's what I believed. She entered my life about 7 years ago, right when my logistics company was taking off. I was 39 back then, at the peak of my mental and physical strength, but carrying a void that money couldn't fill. Laura seemed perfect. She was intelligent, elegant, and always knew exactly what to say to make me feel like my success was our success. We became inseparable. Without hesitation, I handed her the keys to my world, allowing her access to my accounts, my decisions, and my most private inner circle. From the outside, our relationship looked like something straight out of a business magazine. Constant travel, dinners in places where noise doesn't exist, and a sense of partnership I truly believed was unbreakable. She handled the social and administrative side of my personal affairs, while I buried myself in operational work to secure our future. Emotionally, everything felt calm, stable. I trusted her in a way that now feels foolish, but back then, she was my anchor. I remember the nights we toasted to tomorrow, unaware that her tomorrow didn't include me, only my assets. The supposed marriage happened 4 years ago. We were on a private island, surrounded by palm trees and a sun that seemed to bless everything we touched. It was an intimate ceremony, organized almost entirely by her and her connections. I was so consumed by work and blinded by affection that I paid no attention to bureaucratic details. She introduced me to the judge, an older man with a flawless appearance, and we signed documents I believed were our official marriage certificate. With the sound of waves behind us and her hand squeezing mine, I felt like I finally had everything. What I didn't know, what she planned with surgical precision, was that the judge was a hired actor, and the papers were nothing more than legally worthless forms. She wanted the status of a wife, access to my accounts and the protection of my last name, but she also wanted a clean exit, with no legal trail in case something went wrong. My mistake was overconfidence. I was the kind of man who always had a plan B, except with the woman sleeping beside me. My wealth grew. We bought properties, invested in high-risk funds, and everything was supposedly under both our names, or so she made me believe through reports she personally managed. I delegated the management of our private life so I could focus on multi-million-dollar contracts. We were the power couple everyone envied. The balance seemed perfect. I provided the capital and the grind. She handled the image and administration. But fate shows no mercy to the careless. The accident happened on a night of heavy rain. I remember the glare of a truck's headlights, losing control, the scream of twisting metal, and then nothing. An absolute void that lasted 2 years. My body shut down, but somewhere deep inside my mind kept processing silence. During my coma, she wasn't the devoted wife waiting for my return. At first, she came to the hospital, cried in front of doctors, kept up appearances. But as months passed and hope faded, her mask began to crack. She started moving money, liquidating assets I had bled to build. She surrounded herself with new people, people who didn't know me. and began living the life of a wealthy single woman, funded by a man still breathing through machines. While I was trapped inside my own mind, she was celebrating my living death. There was no love. There never was. Only an exit strategy she executed with a coldness that still chills my blood. She believed I would never wake up, that the divorce would be a final formality to secure the last third of my companies before I was unplugged. When I finally opened my eyes a few weeks ago, confusion overwhelmed me. The physical pain was unbearable, but the emptiness on the right side of the room was worse. No flowers, no photos of us, just the steady beeping of heart monitors. The doctor told me she had asked about life support withdrawal barely a month earlier. That was the first truth I learned about the woman I loved. She was eager to see me buried. There I was, 46 years old, muscles wasted, voice broken, realizing the life I built was a house of cards. To her, I was nothing more than an ATM that had finally stopped working. But in silence, as I slowly regained speech and movement in my fingers, memories returned. I remembered the island. I remembered a strange detail on the stamp of the papers she hid so quickly. And I remembered that a year before the accident, I had ordered a quiet internal audit over a minor suspicion, one I later ignored out of love. That was my greatest sin, ignoring my instinct for a pretty face. But instinct doesn't die, it only sleeps. And now, I'm more awake than ever. The humiliation didn't come with shouting. It came with the dull sound of an envelope landing on my chest. I had been conscious for barely 3 days. My body was nothing but bone and pale skin, barely responsive, but my eyes were already searching for the truth. Laura Mitchell walked into the hospital room with the confident stride of someone heading into a business meeting. She didn't kiss me. She didn't take my hand. She stood a few feet from the bed adjusting the gold watch I had bought her on our 3rd anniversary. She looked at me the way someone looks at an old piece of furniture in the middle of a renovation. Her voice was flat, stripped of any trace of the tenderness she used to fake. "It's unfortunate that you woke up now, Michael. It would have been easier for everyone if you had just gone," she said, as she pulled out the documents. They were divorce papers. With cold, calculated precision, she explained that there was nothing left for me. During my 2 years in a coma, she had emptied our joint accounts, claiming outrageous medical expenses that never existed. She had sold the beach house and transferred ownership of my shares into a shell company she controlled. My fingers, still weak, brushed against the paper. She demanded my signature to finish off what remained, my retirement fund and the property where my mother lived. As she spoke, she stroked her neck, a habit she always had when she was lying or when she felt superior. She told me she had a new life now, that she had found someone who was actually present, that she refused to waste another minute tied to a vegetable. The contempt in her eyes was absolute. To her, I was finished, a broken man who couldn't even hold a pen properly. "Sign it, Michael. Don't make this harder. I've already made sure that legally you'll have nowhere to land if you try to fight," she concluded. I didn't explode. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. A glacial calm ran down my spine. I watched as she turned her back to me and stared out the window, unaware that my silence wasn't submission, it was observation. I saw her pull out her phone, send a message, and smile faintly. It was the smile of someone who felt untouchable. Days later, when I was moved into a wheelchair to begin rehabilitation, I discovered the full scope of her betrayal. Laura hadn't just stolen my money, she had destroyed my reputation. She told my business partners that I had been suffering from a degenerative mental condition even before the accident, justifying why she took total control. She removed my photos from the walls of our home, gave away my clothes, and worst of all, pushed away my closest friends by telling them I didn't want visitors. She left me alone, stranded in a desert of white sheets and antiseptic air. The expulsion wasn't just financial, it was existential. I saw myself, a man who once moved millions and led hundreds of employees, reduced to a patient number without private insurance because she had stopped paying the premium to save money. I was transferred to a shared ward, loud, grey and indifferent, treated like a homeless man who had the bad luck of surviving. She kept the mansion, the cars, the connections, the years of my effort. I remember an afternoon when she returned to pressure me for the final signature. She brought her lawyer, a young, arrogant man who didn't even bother to look me in the eyes. They placed the document in front of me. Laura leaned in and whispered, "You're alone, Michael. You're nobody. Sign, and I'll leave you a small pension so you can die in peace in some nursing home." That's when I noticed a small detail on the folder the lawyer was carrying. The logo of the firm that had supposedly certified our marriage on that island. A beginner's mistake. She was so certain of my mental death that she didn't bother covering the traces of her original lie. That afternoon, when they left me with a 48-hour ultimatum, I stared at the ceiling. My right hand, the one she believed was useless, clenched into a fist. The rage wasn't fire, it was ice. She had taken my home, my money, and my health. But in her arrogance, she had given me something far more valuable. Clarity. She believed she was divorcing me. But you can't divorce someone you were never legally married to. She believed the assets were hers because she was the wife. But legally, everything she transferred into her name was massive fraud. Outright theft from an incapacitated man. I felt exiled from my own life, like a ghost watching an imposter sell his belongings. But ghosts have one advantage. No one expects them to strike back. The man she knew, the Michael who loved her, who trusted her, died in that accident. The man sitting in that wheelchair now was a stranger, a predator who had just found the blood trail of his prey. She thought she left me with nothing. What she actually did was place me in the perfect position to destroy her without her ever seeing it coming. The rebuilding of a man doesn't begin in the muscles. It begins in the mind. While physical therapists forced my legs to move, I was moving pieces on an invisible chessboard. I needed an ally. Someone untouched by the social circle Laura had poisoned. That's when I remembered James Caldwell, an old patent attorney I met in my early years. James was older, cynical, and obsessively meticulous, the kind of man who trusted paper files more than digital clouds. I managed to contact him through a nurse, paying her with the last valuable watch Laura had forgotten to remove from my wrist after the accident. When James walked into the hospital's shared ward, his eyes said everything. He didn't feel pity. He felt curiosity, like he was looking at a corpse that had decided to walk again. I told him everything. I didn't leave out a single detail about the island ceremony or the divorce papers she kept demanding I sign. James listened in silence, slowly cleaning his glasses with a calm that brought me peace. Then he smiled, cold and precise. "Michael," he said, "if what you're telling me is true, she's not asking you for a divorce. She's asking you to validate a fraud." We began working in the shadows. While I pretended to recover slowly and clumsily in front of the occasional visitors Laura sent to spy on me, James traced the supposed marriage certificate. Just as we suspected, there was no record of it in the country where the ceremony took place, and it had never been apostilled or registered in our country of residence. The judge was exactly what we thought, a hired actor from a local talent agency that had since shut down. Laura had been living inside a legal fantasy for years, enjoying access to my money without the obligations of a real marriage contract. And here was the fatal mistake, born of her greed. Because we were never married, she had zero legal authority to liquidate my assets while I was in a coma. Every property sold, every share transferred, every account drained wasn't marital distribution. It was aggravated theft and financial fraud. Worse for her, she had signed public documents declaring herself my spouse to speed up transactions. She incriminated herself with every signature, every notary visit, every bank record. My plan wasn't just to recover my money. It was to watch the world she built on my bones collapse on top of her. James brought me daily updates. Laura was planning to marry for real. Her new lover, a tennis instructor 10 years younger with investor fantasies, was already spending my money on sports cars. She needed my signature on the divorce papers, not to free herself from me, but to clean the origin of the funds before her new wedding. If I signed, I'd be retroactively admitting the marriage was real, and that the asset division she executed was consensual. "Don't sign anything," James told me. "Let her think you're hesitating out of sentiment. Let her believe your mind is still foggy." So I played my role. When she visited, I stuttered. I stared into nothing. I asked for time to remember our happy days. She left the room disgusted, but convinced she was still in control. Her arrogance became my greatest weapon. She felt so superior that she stopped covering her tracks. Meanwhile, I rebuilt my strength. At night, I spent hours doing resistance exercises in bed, sweating in silence, feeling fire return to my muscles. Every drop of sweat was a promise of justice. James contacted a former trusted employee from my company, someone Laura had unjustly fired. He gave us access credentials to internal servers she had never changed out of pure negligence. We entered the system. We saw everything. Funds diverted to offshore accounts. My signature forged on property transfer documents while I was on a ventilator. Dates, amounts, IP addresses, even testimonies from notaries she had bribed. We had it all. My patience was absolute. Rational revenge doesn't rush. Every time I felt the urge to confront her, I closed my eyes and remembered the cold weight of that divorce envelope on my chest. The counterattack was ready. James prepared a series of civil lawsuits and criminal complaints designed to activate simultaneously. But I needed a stage. I didn't want this to unfold quietly inside some dark courtroom. I wanted her to feel the same exposure and vulnerability I felt waking up in that hospital bed. She was organizing an engagement party in the mansion I paid for, celebrating her new life with my fortune. That would be the moment. Intelligence was always my greatest asset in business, and here I applied it with surgical cruelty. I wasn't seeking reconciliation. I was seeking the total annihilation of her status. She thought she was a black widow who had won the game. What she never realized was that the board was never hers. Rebuilding my life didn't mean returning to who I was before. It meant becoming the man she should have never betrayed. On the night of her engagement party, the air was thick with the kind of arrogance only other people's money can buy. She had organized everything in the garden of the mansion, beneath a white silk canopy, surrounded by the same elite who had turned their backs on me. I arrived when the celebration was at its peak. I didn't come in an ambulance. I didn't come in a wheelchair pushed by a nurse. I walked in, wearing a custom-tailored grey suit that concealed my weight loss, leaning lightly on a dark wooden cane that gave me an air of regained authority. Silence spread like an oil stain the moment I crossed the threshold. Guests froze, crystal glasses halfway to their lips. Laura Mitchell, standing at the center of the garden laughing with her lover, went pale. Her face, perfectly layered with makeup, collapsed into a mask of pure terror. The man beside her, the tennis instructor, tried to step forward. I stopped him with a single look. I didn't need to shout. My presence was a silent scream. "You look surprised, Laura," I said, my voice deep, echoing through the garden. "It seems you've forgotten that this is still my house." She found her voice, desperately trying to maintain appearances in front of her guests. "Michael, this is insane. You're not well. You should be in the hospital," she stammered, her eyes searching for an exit. She stepped toward me, trying to grab my arm and pull me away. I brushed her off with deliberate slowness, an insult in itself. That's when James Caldwell entered behind me, followed by 2 law enforcement officers and a digital forensics specialist. "I came to bring you the papers you've been asking for," I said, pulling an envelope from inside my jacket. But they weren't signed divorce documents. They were official notices of criminal complaints, fraud, document forgery, and aggravated theft. "But we have a problem, Laura," I continued calmly. "My attorney says we can't get divorced. You see, for a divorce to exist, there must first be a marriage." I paused. "And we were never married." The murmur among the guests sounded like a swarm of wasps. She tried to deny everything, shouting that I was delirious from the coma. That's when James produced the official civil registry certification, along with the sworn statement of the actor she had hired years earlier to pretend to be a judge. Laura's face collapsed. The confidence she had worn for 2 years evaporated in seconds. "Since there was no marriage," I continued, walking slowly around her as officers began sealing off the entrances to the house, "every transfer you made into your name, and into the name of your companion, is illegal. Every dollar spent on this party, every piece of jewelry you're wearing tonight, All of it was taken from a man who was legally incapacitated. Her lover tried to say something about his rights, but one of the officers handed him a court summons. His bank accounts had been frozen earlier that afternoon at 4 o'clock. The sports car parked at the entrance was already being loaded onto a tow truck. The humiliation was total, public, perfectly choreographed. Laura looked at me with visceral hatred, but beneath it was paralyzing fear. She knew this wasn't just a scene. It was the end of her world. "Tomorrow morning, eviction proceedings will begin for this property," I said almost in a whisper, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "You can take with you whatever you were wearing the day I met you. Nothing else. The rest belongs to a man you already buried." Watching her expression was a cold pleasure. I felt no joy, only the satisfaction of a perfectly solved equation. She, who always boasted about her intelligence and her ability to manipulate men, had fallen into the trap of her own arrogance. She believed she was the architect of a flawless plan. She forgot that I built my empire brick by brick, and I know exactly which piece to remove to make it all collapse. The police asked her to come with them for a preliminary statement due to flight risk. As they escorted her away, she tripped over her long dress, losing a shoe on the grass. No one helped her. The same friends who had toasted with her minutes earlier now stepped away as if she were contagious, afraid of being splashed by the legal scandal about to explode. I stood alone in the middle of the garden, watching the patrol lights fade into the distance. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't the silence of a grave. It was the silence of victory. She thought she had taken my future from me. All she really did was give me a reason to come back and take everything. The legal process was a silent massacre. Without the shield of a real marriage, Laura Mitchell had nowhere to hide. In less than 6 months, the rulings began to fall like dominoes. She was convicted of financial fraud and forgery of public documents. She lost every property, every offshore account, and most importantly, for someone like her, she lost her name. Her lover vanished the moment the money stopped flowing, leaving her alone to face a civil debt she won't be able to pay in 3 lifetimes. Today I walk without a cane. My body has recovered its strength, but my eyes are different. People sometimes ask me if it wouldn't have been easier to forgive, if the weight of revenge isn't too heavy for a man who nearly lost his life. My answer is always silence. It wasn't revenge, it was a correction of reality. She tried to erase me while I was unable to defend myself, and life simply made sure everything returned to its rightful place. I've taken control of my company again, not with the same blind ambition I once had, but with renewed clarity. I now understand that a man's value isn't measured by what he builds, but by what he is capable of protecting. Money comes and goes. Houses are bought and sold, but loyalty is the only currency that never depreciates. Laura made the mistake of believing I was my fortune. She never understood that my fortune was merely a consequence of who I am. Sometimes, in the quiet of my new office, I look at the divorce papers she handed me in that hospital room. I keep them as a reminder, not of her betrayal, but of my awakening. They remind me that danger doesn't always come from external enemies, but from those we allow to sit at our table. They remind me that justice, although it may take time, has a surgical precision that no fraud can escape. She now lives in a small rented apartment on the outskirts of the city, working a basic administrative job, watching from afar as the empire she tried to steal continues to grow without her. I don't feel pity. Fate isn't cruel, it's simply fair. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's watching life collect its debts. If this story was as intense for you to hear as it was for me to live, leave a like and tell me in the comments what you would have done. And if you're not subscribed yet, turn on the bell so you don't miss the next stories.